People will tell you that the importance or the future of social communication is online. I'm here to tell you that that future is lonely. Hi, I'm Celine Fitzgerald. I'm a fourth-year psychology major here at Carleton University. Thank you for coming out tonight. Tonight, like they said, I'm going to be talking about interpersonal communication and online communication and how these really influence well-being. We'll first define what social communication is and break it into its basic components. Then I'll walk you through my own personal experience with social communication and my own personal story. After, we'll discuss some of the research that's being brought forth in this field and some of the ideas that are being brought out to really avoid this lonely future that I talked about at the beginning. So, what is social communication? When we look at the way that humans communicate, we realize that this process is really complex and really diverse. We can say one sentence and have it mean a multitude of different things. Now, when we compare this to other animals on the planet, we realize that no other animal on the planet communicates quite like we do. This is something that is uniquely human. When we break communication into its basic components, we realize there are two: a verbal component, dealing largely with the words somebody's saying, and a nonverbal component, which deals with everything else that's influencing that communication process. Things like a smile, the person's body posture, the tone of their voice. Do they seem tense or relaxed? Now, Dr. Moranian from UCLA has determined that this nonverbal component makes up 93% of that social communication process. That's huge. That's leaving only a marginal 7% dealing with the words, something that I feel we maybe consciously attend to more than this nonverbal component. Now, I'd like to draw your awareness to this nonverbal component by doing a demonstration with the audience. I'd like everybody in the audience to turn to someone you've ever met before and introduce yourself using 1 or 2 sentences maximum. But while you're doing that, I want you to try and attend to some of these nonverbal cues I mentioned to you, whether or not the person is smiling, the tone of their voice, and then we'll regroup. Go ahead. Perfect. Is everyone wrapping up? That's great. Is everyone kind of coming to a close? We can regroup? Yeah? If everyone can just kind of bring their conversations to a close. Okay. That's perfect. So how many people in the audience notice at least 3 things? 3 of those nonverbal components. Perfect. I'm not expecting a lot of hands. This is actually a very challenging task because we normally do attend to these words. It's hard to add that extra component of now attending to this nonverbal portion, right? This portion that influences so largely social communication. So it's just something I wanted to draw your attention to since it's not something we really consciously focus on all of the time. What are the implications, or how do we take this knowledge that we know now about social communication and apply it to the online interface? I want you to think of some of the major social communication applications right now, things like Facebook and Twitter, and I want you to think about how they ask us to communicate with each other. Some of you may have already come to the conclusion that these applications are text-based, which means that they force us to focus on that marginal 7% of communication, the words. What are the implications of this? Are there implications to this? These are probably some of the questions you're asking yourself, and certainly the questions I was asking myself as I was creating this talk. I'd like to elaborate on this a little bit further by telling you my own personal story. 2 years ago, I moved to Cornwall, Ontario to attend college. And as you can appreciate, if you've moved around a lot like I have, that this can be an overwhelming experience, right? Cornwall, Ontario was a city in which I knew nobody. Now, when you move to a new city, there's normally 3 things you notice about other people. They talk differently, they walk differently, and they dress differently. And of course, in turn, there's 3 things they're going to notice about you. You talk differently, you walk differently, and hey, you dress kind of funny. I don't know why it is, I don't make the rules, but these are normally the 3 things. So how do you deal with this idea of being an outsider, of not fitting into the larger group? Because evolutionary psychologists have told us that this really is a need. Because back in survival times, or primitive times, being a part of the larger group was necessary to survive. So how do we deal with this? Well, if you're an introvert like me, you know there's a second dimension to this problem. How do I deal with the fact that I'm apprehensive to approach people to begin with? That's a big challenge for an introvert, right? So how do we go about facing these problems and these challenges? These are the questions that I was having, the problems I was facing. Popular opinion told me that the answer was online, that the online interface, communicating online, really mimicked the real world and was maybe even better than communicating in the real world because it wasn't bound by space or time, and it allowed me to connect with multiple people at once. So not knowing what I know now, I followed the advice. I connected online. I became that prolific queen of connections. I had hundreds of friends of friends, cousins of friends, relatives I hadn't even known had existed up until this point of connecting online. And we've all been there. It's embarrassing to admit, but we've all been there. But I can tell you that the more I connected online, the more I felt disconnected in the real world. The more I felt lonely. The more I felt stressed. But being the type of person I am, I like to face an approach and stick with the decision. So I stuck with it for a few months and thought, you know, maybe it's just my approach, like maybe it's just me. So I gave it until about the end of December, when I decided enough was enough. I'm still lonely, I'm still stressed, I'm still not fitting in. So I disconnected. And as you can appreciate, at the end of December, everyone's making their New Year's resolutions. I'm no different. But this year, I decided to get a bit creative. For January of the new year, I was going to speak to one new person every day for that month on my bus route. Why the bus route? Well, as you can appreciate, nobody's taking the bus at 6 or 6:30 in the morning unless they absolutely have to. That is a cruel and unnecessary punishment. Nobody is doing that for kicks. So I figured that people were doing it because they were obliged. They're either going to work or to school. And since the college was on the bus route, I had a pretty good feeling they were going to college. Turns out I was right. Tell you that by the end of the month, I knew almost everybody on the bus, including the bus driver. Most of them are still my good friends today, some of them even my best friends. And that this approach really provided more fruitful results than the online approach. Created this sense of a domino effect. These people that I met on the bus introduced me to people at the school and more people in the community. And I really did start to feel like I was a part of that larger group. I felt happier. And my feelings of loneliness and stress, well, they dissipated into the background the more I connected in the real world. Now I know what you're thinking. Celine, this is beautiful and touching. Oh, my heartstrings are being pulled, but this is a single story. This is chance. How do we know this replicates? Well, I'm here to tell you that the research is saying that my story is not a single story. That people my age who connect online often feel lonely and often feel stressed. But why is this happening? Well, there's a few reasons. Research is saying now that it might be the type of people who prefer to communicate online. That maybe those who prefer to communicate online because they don't pick up on those nonverbal cues as quickly. And maybe that somehow creates an effect of the type of communication or the quality of communication we receive when we communicate online. Other research from Carleton University, John Zielinski from the Happy Lab, if you've heard of him, has done research on extroversion, right? And how if we force ourselves to be that little bit more extroverted in the real world, approaching people, engaging in small talk with that person, serving us the cup of coffee, increases our happiness. Maybe it's something that's distinct or unique about communicating in the real world. The last person I'd like to bring up is Dr. Michael Chan from the University of Hong Kong, the School of Public Health. His research has determined that this is an age effect. That people between the ages of 18 and 34, primarily university students or people just starting to leave university, feel more lonely and more stressed when communicating online because of the way that they communicate online. People our age tend to foster social communications online, which he deems are weak-tie relationships, right? We have that mentor online or somebody in the field that we want to be into that we want to glean information from, right? We want to use them and kind of get into that spot we want to be into in the future. But what happens is, because the internet isn't bound by space or time, and we feel the need to connect with this person in a professional way, we end up having this sense of professionalism going 24/7, even if we're not even gaining anything personal from that relationship. And the research is stating that that's exhausting. It's stressful. It creates loneliness. We feel more disconnected. So, what can we take away from this? Well, I'd like to give you the advice I wish I would have gotten when I moved to Cornwall, Ontario. And it's this. Limit your interactions online. If you're going to bed at 10, don't bring the phone to bed. We've all been there, cuddled the phone, right? That one text message that needed to be sent. Put the phone away, turn it off. At the expense of your well-being, those messages can wait. Use the online world to foster your communications in the real world, right? If you have a great business idea, ask your boss to meet you at a time and a place in the real world. Give yourself that 100% of the communication process to really make your idea the bomb, right? Let your boss know that you're doing this right. And lastly, practice your social communication skills with people in the real world as much as you can. These are highly employable skills, and they're important as we move forward into the future. Now, I hope if you take something away from this talk, it's the advice I wish I would have gotten. And I hope that we can work together to really avoid this idea of a lonely future. Thank you so much for your time.